This is the Critical Therapy Antidote podcast with your hosts, Jaco van Sale and Christine Stephen. Welcome, everybody, to our next installment of Parents Surviving the Gender Cult. I am here with Jaco and Suzannah, who is our guest today, and this is the Critical Therapy Antidote podcast. So we're very excited to have you with us today and to dive into what your story is and how you are doing now and how your child is doing now. So if you can just start by telling us a little bit about your child, when all of this gender ideology and dysphoria started happening, and we'll go from there.
Sure. First of all, thank you for doing this. I think it's really valuable that you're giving this platform to parents to tell our stories. And one small correction, it's children for me. So,
okay.
I first got into this almost 5 years ago. I have 3 kids, and my youngest, and I have girl, boy, boy. My youngest, so my son, came to us when he was almost 15 years old, out of the blue, and told us that he had decided he was transgender. This was in 2019. So it wasn't completely out of the blue to me, in the sense of I hadn't heard of this going on. I was pretty aware of it. And I came to this skeptical. I was seeing what was going on around me, and I was already sort of skeptical of it, but I am a dyed-in-the-wool progressive liberal, big D Democrat, and really just didn't allow myself to voice the questions that I had about all this, because this is what we're supposed to do. It's what we're supposed to believe. And I used to tell myself, well, if you have a problem with this, it's a you problem, and you just need to work on yourself and learn acceptance and inclusion. So when he came to me, and this was a child who, I will say, I wouldn't call him a super masculine kid. He wasn't a super sporty kid. So if you can be a little bit gender nonconforming, he was. He was never someone that I thought was vulnerable to this, right? But certainly not a super typical boy's boy, right? He played some sports. He was into arts. A lot of his friends were girls, So when he came to us, my immediate response in the moment was, I guess we have to do this. And I thought, well, okay, this is what the people are doing. I guess maybe it's true. And it took me about 20 minutes, literally, it took me about 20 minutes to realize this is crazy. No, we're not. And so I had started by asking him, do you have a different name? And he has a gender neutral nickname. And so we didn't have to go there. So he said, no, it's still so-and-so. But really, it was in the same morning that I said to him, can we just stop? Can we pause? Can we just talk about being questioning? And so that was kind of how that started. And then that was the beginning of his high school career. And then he sort of, and I believe with my son, I believe it was 100% social contagion. I do not think, and I know that sort of the prevailing wisdom is that's not, we're seeing that with the girls, and it's a different dynamic with the boys. He's not, he didn't have mental health problems. He did not have, he's not on the spectrum. He's quirky. He's gifted, but not super gifted. So he kind of doesn't fit into any of the buckets. He might be gay. Now he's 19. I still don't know what's going on with him sexually. The short answer with him is we got through his high school career with varying levels of tension and conflict, which is normal, with teenagers in your house. And remember that, like I said, that started in 2019. So then we went through the pandemic. And we are one of, I think, a very small minority of families that I think the pandemic saved us from this with him, because he was in a school, he was in a private school that he went to for academic reasons. He was in a private school that I didn't realize it was sort of like very captured, very much like I call it, in my lighter moments, I call it a transgender factory. I mean, it was
Wow.
it was so many kids in his, he was hanging out with older kids, and like I don't know how many kids in his friend group were of some stripe of, of transgender exploration. So the pandemic pulled him out of that, and we kept him at home, right? And for all the things that were horrible about the isolation, I really felt like I kind of embraced him, and I had my eye on him, and he was, yes, he was on the computer all the time, but we set up his school station where I could see the computer, and I could hear, I was working in the kitchen, he was working in an adjacent room. I could hear what he was doing. I mean, and he was very much compliant with all the COVID stuff. And so it really kept him with us and separated him from those toxic friends. And again, because I don't think there was anything endogenous with him, I think that was why he sort of like let it go. It kind of just gradually seeped out of our lives. He has now told us, he's in college now, but he probably about a year ago, we had a conversation with him in connection with his sister, which is the second kid to go here, and I'll talk about her in a second. But we had a conversation, and he said, I don't believe I'm, I know I'm a boy. I don't believe I'm transgender anymore.
Yeah.
And he seems to be comfortable with the whole thing. Now, again, he's not a super masculine kid. I'm still not sure he might end up being gay. And I'm smart enough to know he's not out of the woods. Like, he could have a crisis and go back to this as a coping strategy that's maladaptive. I know that. But I feel pretty comfortable with where he is now, and we've gotten pretty well connected. I mean, like, I was very careful to try to just stay connected with him through those years where we didn't know what was going on. My other child who's in it, she's my daughter. So she in high school, so she's of that age. She was like 15 years old in 2012, right? When, if you read Jonathan Haidt, like, this is when all of the things started happening, right? With kids getting on smartphones, and I didn't know it at the time. She was on Tumblr. She was exploring, I think, all kinds of this ideology, really. I think she was really being sucked in. And there were times, and she was not at all gender nonconforming. She was super feminine. She was, like, long hair, like, wardrobe. I mean, there was never an issue until puberty, and she was very uncomfortable with her body in puberty.
Yep.
She hated her period. She hated having breasts, which, raise your hand if you hated your period, right?
Right.
I mean, and I don't, and she also became really moody and pretty hostile to us. But she was my oldest, and I think I was a pretty awful teenager as well. So I didn't really see it as necessarily outside of the norm. She went to college. We weren't very well connected. She got pretty distant from us. She used to say things to us that in retrospect were alarming. Like, she started using like language of what I would call the cult. Like, she used to say to us things like, well, people with vaginas. And I just would laugh. I was like, before I'd ever heard it anywhere else. She was picking this stuff up from all of her forays into the internet, right? She got through college. She went to graduate school. She came home and stayed with us during the pandemic. And interestingly, during the pandemic, we experienced what I thought, so now she's like 23. We experienced what I thought was like a renaissance in a relationship. I was like, okay, we're getting through. Like, now she's like coming into herself as an adult. She was in extremely good health. She was really fit. She was eating, teaching us how to like cook. She was teaching us like cooking strategies. We had like, so the four of us, my husband and I, my son and her, we were all in a house, which is a bit small for four people. And we made it work. And I felt like we kind of bonded through the pandemic. Afterwards, we sent her back to graduate school. I don't know what happened. I don't know where she, um, I don't know what happened. The distance started to develop again. We're talking to her on the phone. It's a little bit awkward. And the summer that she was 24, she didn't come home for the summer. She sent us a photo of herself with a buzz cut. She came home for 1 week and had put on something like 50, it looked like about 50 pounds. She clearly was going through some things. I asked her about it. She denied that anything was going on. She went back to school and then she sent us a letter a couple months later and said she didn't want to have anything to do with us. Signed with her birth name, but I learned later she had already changed her name to a male name.
Legally, she changed her name?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
And since then, so that was a year and a half ago. It was a year and a half ago. Since then, we have heard from her a couple of times by text message. She still has not told us, but she now signs things with her new name.
Wow.
And I saw text messages between her and her brother, because at the time, my youngest was still in high school, and the rule was until he was 18, we were able to see his phone. And so I could see text messages that they were exchanging, and she told him she was having a mastectomy, and she said horrible things about us, how we were bigots and hateful people. And she told him, if you ever, you should know if you ever want to, go down this road, like dad's family is super supportive, mom's family is not. And that's where we are. We have no relationship with her.
And how is that for you as a parent?
Oh, it's horrible. It is heartbreaking. It it's awful. I miss having her, and I'm also angry at her. I am so angry at her.
Why angry?
Because I think what she's done is cruel. I think it is. I don't even, I don't even know that I believe in a thing called gender dysphoria anymore. I think there's distress. I think it's part of the human condition. We have distress, right?
Yes.
And we have to navigate that. We have to, like, we have the burdens, our cross to bear, right? Everybody has your
Yes.
things that some of the things that you are the product of things that happen to you, just your genetics, your environment, but we're all the product of all of those things. And part of our job as humans is to develop the resilience to navigate those things and to
Absolutely.
make peace with them. And I feel like, I tried to develop those things in my kids. And I feel like she just gave up on herself. She gave up on herself. She gave up on whatever we tried to teach her. And I think she just became, I think there's some real arrogance and there's some intellect. She is an extremely smart person, extremely smart. And I think that much of what she's done here is driven by this intellectual pursuit to, to, I don't know, put into practice these academic theories that she found appealing when she was 16 years old and just continued to follow.
Isn't it interesting? It's the hubris, the curse of intelligence is the hubris that could go along with it, that we always know better, that we're smart enough, that we imagine that we'd be able to navigate our way through the storms of life on a different map, the map we choose for ourselves. That is sadly the curse of the hubris that comes with being intelligent, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Now, I just want to find out. So, did your son come out, or did he express gender confusion before or after your daughter came out with her gender distress?
Before she came out with any gender distress, although she had come out to me when she was a freshman in college as a lesbian. And he knew
I
that.
see. So that's interesting. So we know that there are more girls than boys who present with gender distress these days. And we know that girls are always more susceptible to social contagion than boys are.
Right.
And with social contagion, whether it is the self-mutilation or the eating disorders or gender dysphoria, even rumors of suicide. Back in South Africa, we knew that there were certain months were high risk months. And also when there were attempts or suicide attempts and the newspaper published suicide attempts from high profile schools, you could expect 5, 6, 7 suicide attempts within the next few weeks from adjacent schools, and usually girls.
It's
That is how
astonishing.
social contagion works. It is just because the prevalence and the presence of the neurosis is just so much higher among adolescent girls. It is what it is. And it's evolutionary contingent. That is, I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, women have so much to contend with because of their physical vulnerability and the risk of bearing children. They're so much more in tune with their bodies. Their bodies feature so much largely in their psychology, socially. It makes sense if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective. And it's interesting also to hear about your boy, that he was, by the sound of it, he was quirky, like you said, he was gifted. He wasn't super masculine or sporty. He was into arts. So there is a bit of a personality profile that's featuring, right?
Yeah.
Also very sensitive, I assume.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And then there might be an issue around his sexuality, and then he finds himself in a school that is deeply drenched in gender ideology. So there is the source of the social contagion. So there is a school that's fostering the ideology. There are peers that have completely endorsed the ideology. That makes sense. And if you read the WPATH files that recently emerged, it is just, one of the complaints that even those clinicians were talking about was the inability of these adolescents to fully appreciate the consequences of transitioning, even with hormones and with surgery.
Right. And I think also he fails to instill, because even
Mhm.
though he's desisted, he's still very much intrigued by the ideology, right? Which is why I said I
Okay.
don't think he's out of the woods. But even now, and he's a smart kid, he
Mm.
doesn't believe um he believes that all the safeguards are there. Like he doesn't, when I spoke to him about the risks of medical transition, and he has this one particular friend who, I mean, just, she's a girl, and she was clearly going through medical transition during high school. And so, and she was pretty open with him about it, and he was of the belief that, she had had years and years of therapy, and like, and when I talked to him about the risks, he said, oh, but all of the doctors are on top of it. And I don't know, in her particular case, maybe she had excellent care, I don't know, but I believe that it is rampant that young people are not getting excellent care, that they're
No.
just being rushed through this process.
Right.
And his thought to me is, you just don't understand. You don't know. You don't understand. Like, it's all safe. It is all
No.
well wrapped up.
Years and years of therapy is now a risk for such maladaptive behavior.
Yes, because
Years and years of
most
therapy.
therapy is gender affirming, and that's where a
It's
big
gender
issue
affirming.
is
Yeah.
in our profession, and that is
So
a huge
I
problem.
appreciate hearing you say that. I'll tell you, because you're therapists, and
Yes.
until a few years ago, I was always a big believer in therapy. I really, like, I think I would have been, someone to say everybody could probably benefit from therapy, right? And when my son when my son came out or made his pronouncement or whatever we're calling it, I contacted his pediatrician. I said, is there, this is what it was, of course, by this electronic portal. I didn't speak to a human, but, this is what he mentioned to me, and I have a lot of concerns. And, is there somebody you can refer me to? And all they did was refer us to the gender clinic at Children's Hospital. And I knew enough. I knew enough to
Yeah.
know I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
And we did find, and I did, I started getting connected to the parent resources, and I found a therapist that I don't even remember how, but somehow I vetted him and thought, well, it seems like he might be more critical, he might be skeptical, and I connected my son with him. My son was not engaged at all in that process, but my point is, like, I appreciate hearing that, because I just had a visceral reaction of, you got to be really careful. Like
Yes,
if
you do.
the minute you walk into their door
That's
and you
right.
let your son in there privately, like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
No, these days, psychotherapy or psychotherapists can be snake oil merchants. And people need to be very, very careful, especially children who've been in therapy for many, many years. Why do children need to be in therapy for many, many years? What's going on there?
Right.
What's going on? Children are not supposed to be in therapy for many, many years. If they are, then the therapist is either not doing their job, or the child's running circles around them. And with children, you always bring in parents. There's something systemically going on if children persist in misbehaving or in resorting to maladaptive behavior. There's got to be a resolution sometime. What we do find children being in therapy for many, 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 many years, they get over-therapized. And when they grow up and they go for therapy again, they have all the terms, all the terminology ready, but there's no deep insight, which
Well, they
tells
don't have the
me
resilience
that they
either.
don't have the resilience. But I mean, talk about resilience.
Yes,
Resilience follows experience.
absolutely.
But what many of these therapies do is they run ahead of experience, preemptively explain what's going on, and the child just opts out of experiencing. Even in therapy, it's a painful process. So you don't bombard your client with psycholingo or psychobabble, because all you're doing is you're creating alternative defenses without actually helping the client to gain insight into themselves. Because actual insight follows experience. And many of these children just don't get the opportunity to actually experience life and the anguish and the subsequent understanding of their anguish, developing their own language to describe their anguish, developing that insight, and subsequent to that, the resilience.
Right. When my daughter was little, there was a book called, and I don't even remember it that well, but I read it. It's called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee, or The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And the like I said, it was years ago. I don't remember that much about it, but I do remember that what I took from it was, we can't and shouldn't protect our kids from all the things, right? I mean,
Yes,
we have to allow them to, and it's hard as a parent, but we have to allow them to experience the bumps and bruises of life,
they have
because
to learn how to fail. That's right.
correct, they have to learn how to fail, and they have to learn how to be a little injured, right? And to
Yep.
and to navigate that.
Yep.
And I agree with what you said, Yako, that they're in therapy, and they're learning nothing should ever hurt.
Yes.
Yes.
Nothing should be uncomfortable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And would you say
No.
that was what your son had probably been through?
No, with that therapist, no, I don't think he was. I think he only went to therapy a couple of times, because although the therapist I don't think was captured, I think he would have done he told us privately, when my son wasn't there, he said, I don't see gender dysphoria in this kid. And he said, I don't see it. I don't think, and I'm not sure he's really engaged in this process. Then COVID happened, and he offered us to go online.
Yes.
He just decided to cut it off, because my son was not, he hadn't made a connection with him, and I thought it was going to be harder to do it online, and I
Right.
didn't, and based on what he told us, I thought, you know what, actually and again, this was sort of just an instinct I had because it was before I had done a lot of reading on this. I just felt like the last thing I want to do is basically get him entrenched in therapy where he thinks like he needs therapy in order to like exist. When the reality is, I don't think he does. I don't think he's really in distress. I don't think that he, it has something that he needs a professional to help him navigate. And so we just pulled him out.
Mhm.
Oh.
Yes.
And therapy is not supposed to replace good parenting.
Right.
In
Right.
fact, the therapist needs to bring in parents, show them, guide them, coach them, help them to understand their kid, and teach them the skills to facilitate the development of this kid.
Mm.
It's not supposed to replace parenting.
Or at worst, what I feared at the time, and I think happens is it puts kids again, it triangulates
Yes, it does. And the therapist
that's
colludes with the child, and
Mm.
that creates a bigger problem between the child and the parents ultimately, and that attachment there. So I
And when
think
right.
you
your
find
gut
something,
instincts on this and not wanting your child to be overly therapized, I think your gut instinct on that was spot on.
yeah.
It
And I
really
mean,
was.
the risk of triangulation and colluding with a child exists on neutral issues. On transgender issues, you don't stand a chance.
Right,
There
right.
is an ideological, occultic commitment with a therapist to collude with a child, even against the parents. You don't stand a chance.
Yeah, it's chilling. It is
Yeah.
chilling to hear you say that, honestly.
So that is your boy. And I'm glad to hear that, before I go down that route. So Kenneth Zucker was the person in Canada who devised this treatment strategy called watchful waiting. Now, my colleague back in South Africa, who's leading an organization there, First Do No Harm SA, he doesn't like the expression watchful waiting. He prefers the expression active waiting. So watchful waiting isn't the same as doing nothing. Watchful waiting is observing your child, engaging with your child, facilitating your child exploration of who they are. Gender might just be an aspect of it. So watchful or active waiting is not the same as obsessing about gender, because many times it's got very little to do with gender. Gender just becomes the convenient target for
Right.
whatever other identity issues the child may be grappling with. Active waiting is an engaged, it's an active, it's an adventurous, uh, almost a play, an adventurous discovery of who the child is, and you do it through different activities. So there's a lot of parenting involved in active waiting.
That's interesting. And again, it's a little validating to me because I just like my instinct told me what we need to do is get this. And again, we had a few months before COVID happened, right? And I thought, what we need to do is get this kid engaged in things. I was suspicious of the school, so we need to get him engaged in things, in addition to what he's doing at school. And we had him, I insisted that he sign up with me, and we did some volunteer tutoring together, and I had like basically like it was like mom camp. It was like every weekend we were taking him to events or concerts or a podcast recording for something that he was interested in, and museums, and just like trying to keep him engaged in the world outside of our home, off the computer, off his phone, and away from the toxic friendships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's orientated towards the external environment as opposed to being forever obsessed with the internal environment. That is one of the curses of long-term therapy for
Yes.
children. They get obsessed with their internal environment without ever risking venturing into the external world.
Yeah, there's this just constant rumination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
Now,
and what about with your daughter? Did she ever go to therapy on her own? Is it something that you considered?
So so again, when she was in high school, she was a difficult teenager.
Yes.
And I considered, and we went through a period in like her late high school years where she spent a lot of time in her room by herself on the computer. And I approached her at least once and asked her, are you okay? You spend so much time alone. Are
Right.
you think you might be depressed? And of course, you know, she kind of waved it off. And I don't know. I ought to have been more assertive, but I don't know that therapy would have helped anyway. So no, the
Right.
answer is we didn't. I thought, I wonder if she needs to see somebody. And again, I was kind of a terrible teenager. And I mean, in terms of like just emotionally, the emotional manipulation and being difficult for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I think this is just like what, you know, she's just got to get through this puberty thing. So no, but then as soon as she went to college, so her first semester at college, or maybe it was the second semester, she called us and said, I started seeing a therapist. I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety and ADHD.
Okay.
The depression didn't shock me again because of where we had been in her adolescence.
Sure.
Again, the anxiety too, not a shock. I wouldn't have thought it was clinical, but you know, I don't know. I'm not a professional. And the ADHD, I had no idea. I truly had no idea. She apparently, you know, was diagnosed with the inattentive kind, you know, not the hyperactive kind. And so she was a very good student. She was she was a compliant kid. And so like, I didn't see it anyway. So all those things. And then, so she was getting some amount of therapy, mostly I think in the form of medication management. But I don't know, because at that point she was over 18. She didn't give us access to her medical records. So I don't know what was happening. What I do know is when we got to that point, right, the months immediately preceding when she began medically transitioning, so several years after this initial diagnosis, we had our bank accounts linked just administratively, and I was able to see spending on her bank account. And I did see that she started seeing a therapist for like 3 or 4 or 5 months before we became aware of what she was doing. So that's all I know about the therapy that she has had.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how has this affected your family on a broader scale? Because I mean, 2 of your 3 children, right? I mean, that's hard enough and impossible enough with just one, but to have a second child also go through this, what have been the effects on, you know, your family life as a whole?
It has been really difficult. So when but it's a good question, and we're kind of getting to a better place. My son, my youngest, was a senior in high school. And again, this is the one that had his own, gender issues. And he was a senior in high school when she sort of blew the whole thing up on us. And that he was initially very, it sort of reignited the conflict between us and him, because he was immediately really an ally to her. He was very, and again, she didn't talk to us, but to us about her, he was very affirming. And he told us that, we were wrong, and we were just misguided. And I don't know if he ever called us bigots, but that was certainly the vibe.
Yeah.
And so and it's his senior year of high school. And as you might imagine, my husband and I were devastated. We were devastated. And I mean, like, it just brought this grief in our house. And that was not a fun thing for my son to have to cope with during his senior year, and even with all the struggles that he brought in, I didn't want that for him. Right. I really, and so the 3 of us tried, we kind of tried to dance around this thing. We tried to, sometimes talk about it, not very much. I wasn't sure. And again, by this time I am so afraid of any kind of therapy. I thought maybe we need to get a professional, like a family therapist, to talk to us. But I thought the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to say to me, you need to affirm your daughter.
Yeah.
You need to stop calling her your daughter. And also, and then, my son, I didn't know where he would go with that. So so we had to navigate it ourselves. My other son, who's my middle child, has been incredibly supportive. He's sort of the classic middle child, though. Like he wants everybody, he doesn't want it. And to his credit, he doesn't want to
Mm.
alienate anyone.
Yeah.
He wants to like keep all the, but he was very sympathetic to me, and sensitive to my husband and me. And he said to us at one point, he said, if I can do something to bring us all together. So it has been a very difficult dynamic.
Yeah.
And my daughter is not only completely cut off from us, she is also largely cut off from her brothers. Not formally, like she didn't send them the same letter that she sent us, but she's just, she's not in communication with them, like maybe an occasional text message. They don't communicate well. She's prickly, she's difficult so it has really altered the landscape of the five of us, right? And we have tried recently, actually over Christmas, I think it was, the four of us were all together, and we were just having dinner, and I said, hey, you guys, how about if we have a conversation about the empty chair in this room? And my boys said, oh, thank God, yes, let's get it out. And we all just like talked about how we feel about what has happened. And I said, I need to like be comfortable around language. I want to be able, I'm not going to police your language. Like if you guys, like if you really truly believe that you have an older brother, I'm not going to correct you, but I need you to understand she's my daughter. She'll always be my daughter. And I don't want to be corrected when I say that either. So and I don't want you to, go out and like report me to the, to the virtue police, right? I mean, like, can we just agree? And we had a very productive, I think, and full of love conversation. So the question is a good one. And the answer is it's evolving. Like we're getting there.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Just in terms of your daughter, did she have early trauma of any kind that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I don't know. I just don't know. It could be something that I didn't see. I'm confident it didn't happen in our house. But I don't know.
Is she also autistic? Artistic.
She I mean, she was musical. She had a beautiful voice. And was really good at reading music, but I don't, not as much as I never found her as like sensitive and artistic as my younger son.
I see. Because they are the ones that tend to, look, an artistic person is very imaginative. And it can be amazing to be imaginative, but it also provides what we call a psychic retreat. So if you don't want to be confronted with something, you retreat in some other alternative world where you can you can live out your wishes and even conspire or calculate or plan how to not confront this thing you need to confront in life. Be that as it may, she sounds very angry.
I think that's incredibly perceptive for someone who's never met her. I think she is very angry. I think she is, yes. I don't know. I don't know how to address that.
Yeah. You see, when we think in terms of self-mutilation, or when people cut themselves and any other of these body dysmorphic disorders, we tend to feel very sorry for people. And yes, we should, because it's an expression of extreme anguish. But it's a type of expression, and the type of expression is very aggressive. The defenses they resort to tend to be projective defenses, where they discharge the internal distress in acting out behavior that tends to be hurtful and destructive, which is unfortunate. It is difficult enough to raise an angry child with such expulsive behaviors. It is a totally different ballgame when you're engaged with an adult who still resorts to those types of behaviors. They have the strength, the freedom, and the intelligence of an adult person to now discharge their anguish and their distress upon their environment and even themselves. that is unfortunate. That's just one of those realities that we unfortunately have to deal with.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. You're right. And it describes a lot of what you just said really does resonate. And when she came home, 2 summers ago, in the summer of 2022, and for a week. And that was when I said she had noticeably gained a lot of weight. She had, buzzed her hair. She came to our house and was all of those things that you just described. She was aggressive. She was rude. She was she just like had a physical presence that was very unlike how she had been previously. And she was just hostile to us. And she seemed like someone who was very angry about something.
Your challenge will be, if she does decide to turn around and to seek refuge with her family, that you would be prepared to let her in again.
And it's hard. And yes,
know.
that is a challenge. And I, this is one of the things that I wrestle with. I don't know what she's going to do with herself. And I don't know how far down she's gone down the road medically, right? There's only so much you can come back from. But even if she doesn't, even if she persists for the rest of her life in insisting that she's a man, I hope she still comes back into our lives, because I feel like there's a space we could navigate, right? Where we can make peace with the situation as it is and have each other in each other's lives. But it is, you're right, it is very hard to keep that light on for her. So to speak.
Absolutely. You've got to survive this, see. You've got to survive her onslaughts.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it's easy for me to say. Look, and I'm not saying it lightly. Please, I'm not saying it lightly. But I mean, psychologically, for her sake, but also for your own sake, you've got to survive these onslaughts. You've got to survive as parents.
Yeah.
And we need to, how about we discuss this? What do you do to survive currently? What has been your strategy that's enabled yourselves, you, your husband, and the rest of the family to survive this?
Well, so it's been a process, right? It's been evolving. In the beginning, I did a lot. I mean, it was a lot. Talk about ruminating. I mean, I couldn't not think about her and not think about just how sad I felt, right? Every morning, every morning I wake up, and that's the first thing that's on my mind is my husband has struggled with, and he said this from day one, I don't ever want to get to a place where I don't know if my daughter's dead or alive.
Yeah.
And when she's out of contact, like that's the reality. Like we don't know. So I spent a lot of time, I did a lot of writing. I, just did a lot of like internal, and then at some point I realized I got to get out of myself, right? I have to, I can't do this. And so we've become, and just as a brief aside, thank God, thankfully, our marriage has strengthened through this process, which I think the opposite could happen, right?
It could very easily happen that causes so much conflict between you and your husband. I mean, we've seen breakups over this with other families.
I can totally see it. If you're not
Absolutely.
on the same page, especially, but even if you are on the same page, just like navigating the grief and dealing with the roller coaster of emotions that we're going through.
And I think grief, that's such a powerful expression, because I think sometimes, I mean, even talking about these issues, we overlook the fact that there's a grieving process, grieving who your child was, grieving what your child has kind of become, what you had hoped for your child, the dreams and expectations and things that we want for our kids in general. And those things not coming to fruition, probably potentially never coming to fruition. That's a process of grieving and moving into some place of acceptance where this is our new normal now that we have to live with.
Right.
And we don't have an option, really. This is what we have to learn to live with, learn to survive with this. And that's, I think, something that's just so incredibly dismissed with parents and what they suffer through when their children are going through these kinds of issues.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I kind of, to go back to the answer to your question, I kind of had to use the same strategy myself with what I felt like I needed to do with my son, when I was trying to get him through this, which
Yes.
is I got to get outside of myself. I have to, so I have become more engaged in our religious community. I have become more less engaged in all, for a while, for a period of time. Everything I read, everything I listened to was about gender.
Yeah.
It was like, and I became, I think, very well informed, but I just made myself crazy. It was just like I was swimming in information that just made me sad, made me outraged, made me feel like, the whole world doesn't know what's going on, and it was just it was too much. It was causing me. I don't think it was good for my mental health. So like I'm doing more things, like I read fiction, I listen to things that have
Yes.
nothing to do, right? I
Yes.
take
Which
breaks
is
from
really
it. Like
important.
I cannot be steeped in it.
Mhm.
Yes.
And my husband and I we've done some traveling, just to get really kind of reset.
Wonderful.
We're also in a kind of a professional inflection point, and so we're taking on new challenges and new volunteer opportunities, and just basically the answer is the getting outside of my own distress, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
never going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
I read the book Demon Copperhead recently, and in that book, the main character describes grief. It's a Barbara Kingsolver novel, and he describes grieving as carrying a bag of gravel
Mm-hmm.
throughout your life. And he says, and every now and then somebody comes along and carries it with you for a little ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like I see it that way. Like it's always I'm going to carry this always, right? It is
Absolutely.
distress. It's not going away.
Absolutely.
It is like any other loss. But I find ways to sort of like lighten the load and move on.
That's
I'm
good.
55 years old this year.
Yeah.
I don't know how many more decades I have on the planet, but I can't live them. I can't live them joylessly, right? So I have to find it. I'm not going to find it in the relationship with my daughter that I had expected, that I had hoped for.
Yes.
But I might, but I will find it in other ways. And like you said, Jaco, I have to be open to what might come with her down the road. I have no idea.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give parents who are struggling, who are just now discovering that their children are going through something similar? What would you say to them?
So I was trying to prepare for that question because I listened to your interview of, I forget one of the other moms, and I was like, huh. And she recommended, she talked about all the resources, and I guess I would agree with that. Is like you're not alone. That is the first piece of advice. You're not alone, and you're not crazy, right?
Yes.
That said, I think you have to not obsess. Like you can't fixate, right? I mean, you have got to take care of yourself in ways that are, and I know, like, as parents, particularly if your parents, like my daughter's already an adult, but particularly if your kids are still children, um it's very hard because you feel like this is my job now, this is what I have to do, and it's true, it is your job, but you have to get outside of it sometimes. Like it is so easy to get sucked in like quicksand, and then this will consume you. It will consume you. It will consume your all of your parenting resources. It will consume your family, and so you have to find that space of, it is the fight of your life, yes, but it also can't be everything.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. You are mother, but you're also wife. You're also yourself. You're also friend, etc. Right?
Correct. Right. And at the same time that
Mm.
this is happening in my life, I have, you know, I have siblings and I have a mother who's aging, and like I have,
Yes.
yes, that's exactly right. And those places are, first of all, they're kind of a refuge for me because my family is very supportive of what we're going through, but it's also, it's like I'm needed there.
Mhm.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, this has been a fascinating interview.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate this. This has been, I was a little nervous to log on.
Well, it was wonderful to have you, and I think you have so
Hmm.
much to share with other people who are struggling, other parents who need to hear some of these words that you've shared with us today. So it's truly a pleasure and an honor to be able to sit with you and to hear your story.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.